I get asked this question every single day, and that is if I should go the Rivalate weapon, the Trailblazer weapon, or the Atlas EX weapon. I'm a new player and I don't know which weapon to go. Well, lucky for you, all three weapon choices are very good, so you can't go wrong picking any of them. But in today's video, we're going to take a deeper dive into these weapons, and I'll be explaining the pros and cons of each weapon so that you can pick the right weapon that fits your playstyle the best. But first of all, if you're new to the channel, I upload PSO2 content daily, so if you do play this game, I would really appreciate a subscribe as it really helps out the channel. Anyway, without further ado, let's begin the video. Alright, first of all, there's a couple things I want to get out of the way first. I'm going to assume that you have the breakthrough material to make each respective weapon. So for example, the Trailblazer weapon, you need the Founder's Amphitrite. I'm going to assume that you have that. For the Rivalate weapon, you're going to need the Key Rivalate. I'm also going to assume that you have these, alright? So first of all, we're going to talk about the Atlas EX weapon, and then we'll work our way up to the Rivalate weapon. So the pros of the Atlas EX weapon. The first pro is you can make this weapon anytime. You can literally start the game today and you'll still be able to get the Atlas EX weapon. While if we look at the other two weapons, the Trailblazer and the Rivalate, they both require key components which we got through the mission pass. So if you are a relatively new player and you missed Season 10 and Season 11's mission pass, then these two weapons are a little bit more difficult to get, while the Atlas EX weapon is a lot easier to make as you do get the breakthrough material in the process of making this weapon. Okay? The second pro for the Atlas EX is its potential, and that is Unflagging Spirit level 3. So the nice thing about Unflagging Spirit is this is essentially a cheat death mechanic on your weapon. So when you do take fatal damage in an urgent quest or an expedition or anything in general, this weapon potential will kick in once and keep you alive at 1 HP. So this weapon is an extremely good weapon as a starter weapon, because basically this weapon allows you to make a lot more mistakes. It's basically like an extra crutch. So if you do play extra aggressive, or if all of your stats are offensive based stats and you don't really have any defensive based stats, then this is definitely something nice to have, because you can go full ham on the boss and have zero fear of dying because you know that you have this potential that will kick in one time. Now do keep in mind that there is a limit to this potential. It can't keep proccing over and over. It can only proc once per urgent quest, per expedition, per session basically. Now the third pro for the Atlas EX weapon is its compatibility. You can see over here it's compatible with S1, S2, S3, and S4 augments, which means that this weapon is extremely flexible. Something that a lot of people underestimate is the S grade augments, which are these S ability slots, because a lot of your weapon's power actually comes from this. Alright? Now for the cons of the Atlas EX weapon. The number one con, the most glaring issue, is its attack power. You can see its attack power over here is 2069. If we look at the Rivalate, you're looking at 2336. So that is your number one downside. The second con to the Atlas EX weapon is linked with the first one, and that is even more DPS loss. And the main reason for that is because of its potential. Because the potential Unflagging Spirit already revives you once, like it gives you that cheat death, it doesn't give you that much damage in return because you're mainly getting it for the revive. While if we look at the Rivalate weapon, Liberated Fang over here, this gives you a lot of offensive stats. And especially if you get the Redux potential, which is like the potential plus, the Rivalate's weapon potential plus, or the Redux, essentially gives you 20 more critical rate, gives you 23 increased power, as well as 15% decrease in PP consumption, which is extremely strong. While if we look at the Atlas EX weapon, this only gives you 18% more power, as well as the cheat death mechanic. So obviously if you do not need the cheat death mechanic and you just want raw damage, then the Rivalate Katana might be something you want to look at instead of the Atlas EX weapon. And that pretty much covers the pros and cons for the Atlas EX weapon. So who should be using the Atlas EX weapon? I recommend beginners, or people who are new to the game, or people who are still learning the game to pick up an Atlas EX weapon, because it gives you that extra quality of life where you can make mistakes and you'll still come back to life and you still do decent damage. You're not going to be dealing the most damage, but at the very least you won't die as often, and when you're alive you can deal damage. When you're dead, you don't deal damage. Okay? Next up is the Trailblazer weapon. I personally use this weapon, and the reason I use this weapon is because of its potential. So you can see over here, its potential is Photon Resurrection level 3. So what Photon Resurrection level 3 does is it gives me 10% more damage just across the board, and whenever my PP goes down below 10%, it will refill my PP to max instantly and give me an additional 3% damage increase. However, there is an internal cooldown, and that is every 2 minutes. So eventually I will run out of PP. It won't keep regenerating my PP and keep me topped up all the time because of the internal 2-minute cooldown. So now let's talk about the pros and the cons for the Trailblazer weapon. So the pros is if your class is extremely PP hungry, this is a very good weapon to have, mainly because it gives you that extra buffer whenever your PP goes below 10%, boom, it's full again. And if you play a class such as the Phantom, which benefits from having a lot of PP, then it basically gives you more DPS uptime because it's going to fill up your entire PP gauge. So let's say, for example, you have 200 PP or you have 250 PP, then immediately boom, it's full again. So you have a ton of time to dish out a ton of damage, which is very, very nice. The second pro is again the compatibility. As you can see over here, it supports S1, S2, and S3 abilities, which is also very, very nice. And the special ability factor for this weapon is called Power Amp. So if you have a melee weapon, it will be called Melee Amp. If you have a range weapon, it's going to be called Range Amp. And if you have a tech weapon, it will be called Tech Amp. So I'm just going to dub it Power Amp, basically. And what this does is it essentially gives you more power. However, there is a condition to this, and that is if you can get 200 power, it will give you even more damage. So you can see on my weapon specifically, I do have plus 200 melee power so that I can take advantage of this extra 2% from the melee amp. And the third pro about this weapon is that its melee power is slightly higher than the Atlas EX weapon. So you can see here it's 2145 versus the Atlas EX's 2069. Now for the cons for the Trailblazer weapon. The first con is if you want to take advantage for the power amp, you need to augment your weapon. So augmenting your weapon is very convoluted and very confusing, and you need to sort of have a general idea of what the heck you're doing, or you're gonna mess things up. I just realized that this person over here is dancing, so to prevent my video being demonetized, I will very conveniently move my character here to block it. But let us continue. Now for con number 2 for the Trailblazer weapon. The Trailblazer weapon's in a kind of awkward position in the fact that it doesn't deal that much damage. So you can see, you know, it's 2145 versus the Rivalate, which is the next upgrade, which deals 2336. But not only that, the Rivalate Katana's potential over here gives you a lot of offensive stats, while the Trailblazer's potential over here again is more utility based, being able to refill your PP gauge instantly if you need a lot of PP. The Trailblazer weapon is very nice to have. However, you can overcome this problem by having the Trailblazer weapon as a secondary weapon. Because the thing about this potential right here is, let's say that you use a Rivalate weapon because it deals more damage. So you can use this, burn through all of your PP, switch to your Trailblazer weapon, immediately Photon Resurrection will kick in, regenerate your PP to full, and you can switch back to the Rivalate Katana and deal even more damage again. And so that is the main downside to the Trailblazer weapons. The Trailblazer weapons do mediocre damage, the potential is where all its value is at that PP regeneration. But the thing about the PP regeneration is you're not locked into this weapon. You don't have to use the Trailblazer weapon to get the regeneration. You can simply switch to a random Trailblazer weapon with 0 augments on it, have the potential kick in, refill your PP to full, and then switch to your big damaging weapon. And that is why the Trailblazer weapon is in a kind of awkward situation. Even with its Redux or the potential plus version, the Photon Resurrection is not going to be that strong. What it does is it just increases your damage from 10% to 17%, and that's the only thing it changes. It doesn't make your PP regenerate faster, it doesn't lower the internal cooldown for how often it can proc. The only thing it does is increase its damage. But as I said before, the damage for the Trailblazer weapon is kind of in an awkward spot. It's not super duper high, it's not super duper low, it's kind of like smack dab in the middle. So who should be using a Trailblazer weapon? The first type of person that would be using a Trailblazer weapon would be a class that requires a lot of PP. So for example, if you play a Phantom, or if you play a Force, or if you play a class that really depends on your PP, you need PP to deal damage. Those are classes that I would recommend having a Trailblazer weapon. Keep in mind, I said having a Trailblazer weapon. Does not mean that you should spend tons of time affixing and making the perfect Trailblazer weapon, because I believe if you have not invested in augmenting a Trailblazer weapon, that I would use it as a PP battery. Now, in my case, why am I sticking with the Trailblazer weapon if I know I won't be dealing as much damage? The issue for me is because I have already invested in the augments. As you can see over here, here is my Trailblazer katana. I do have a substantial amount of melee power. I have 2,345 because of the augments. And not only that, you can see that my melee power is plus 200, and I have 8 different affixes on this weapon. So this was not cheap. This cost me 100 million, maybe 120 million, something along those lines. It cost me a substantial amount of meseta, resources, and headache. So in my case, it might make a little bit more sense to just stick with this weapon until the Dark Banisher Ayer weapon comes out, and then upgrade to that, as it is a more substantial upgrade and thus gives me a little bit more time to save up meseta, to save up resources, so that I can do my next big upgrade, which is going to cost, 100 million, 200 million meseta. And that is my train of thought, and that is why I am sticking with the Trailblazer weapon. But if you have not invested 100 million into augmenting your Trailblazer, then I would recommend just making the Trailblazer, but use it as a secondary weapon for the Photon Resurrection potential. Now, last but not least, we have the Rivalate weapon. So let's talk about the pros and cons for the Rivalate weapon. So pros, Rivalate weapon does a ton of damage. It is disgustingly strong. You can see here just the melee power with 0 augments is 2,336. So this is on par with my Trailblazer weapon with 8 augments, alright? And this is with 0 augments, just the base weapon, so it is extremely strong. Now on top of that, we look at its potential Liberate Fang level 3. So the potential Liberate Fang level 3 gives you critical rate plus 20%, increased power plus 16%, and decreased PP consumption by 15%. So it's lowering the PP cost for all your abilities, it's giving you 20% more critical chance, and it's giving you 16% more damage just across the board. And there are no conditions for this potential to proc. It is just always on, which is extremely strong. Now, if you go the extra mile and you get the Redux version, which is essentially the potential plus version, that means you'll get 20% critical rate, so no change there, but your power will increase to 23% more power, and it'll still decrease your PP consumption by 15%. So the main thing that you're getting from the Redux version is that extra power. It boosts it up to plus 23%, which is a huge deal. So basically, if you get a Rivalate katana with 0 augments on it, it's gonna be stronger than the Trailblazer weapon with 8 augments on it. The Rivalate weapon is extremely powerful, and it is purely offensive based. Now this sounds like a no-brainer, right? Like, duh, everyone should just go for the Rivalate because it does tons of damage. Well, you're sacrificing a couple things. So let's talk about the cons. Well, first of all, you're sacrificing some quality of life things, such as the Atlas EX weapons. Oh, you revive once after dying, so that's super duper nice. But maybe you're really good at the game and you never die, then that's perfectly fine. Secondly, you're losing the Trailblazer potential, where it refills your PP back to maximum, but you can solve this problem by making a Trailblazer weapon, so when you're out of PP, you just switch to it, boom, you get fully PP, then switch back to your Rivalate weapon and continue blasting the enemies away. However, con number 3, this is the one where you'll need to sit down and think hard about, and that is the cost of making one of these weapons. So first of all, you need to make a Novell weapon plus 35. This is no big deal. You can do this easily. Second of all, you're gonna need a key Rivalate, which you got from season 11 of the mission pass. So I'm gonna assume you have that. Then you need 10 Diards as well as 500 Plamia. These two are gonna take a little bit of time, especially the Plamia. I think you need to break down 14-star weapons for the Plamia and 15-star weapons for the Diards. You're gonna need 500 X cubes, no big deal. You need 200 class X cubes. Depending on how much you play, you may have this or you may not. And last but not least, you're going to need 50 ultimate boosters. Now, the only consistent ways to get ultimate boosters right now is to farm ultra hard mining base and ultra hard Luther, I believe. But you're going to need 50 of these ultimate boosters, which will take some time. But if you have all of these materials already, then I would say go make the Rivalate weapon. The Rivalate weapon, you can't go wrong with the Rivalate weapon, especially if you get its potential plus or the Redux version, mainly because it will deal tons of damage. It'll carry you all the way until the cross weapons comes out, so you'll be perfectly fine. The cross weapon is basically the last weapon that we get that will be available at the end of episode 6. So, you know, that's basically like the last weapon we get, I think. So basically this weapon is going to carry you through all the way till then. And even when that weapon comes out, this weapon can compete with the cross weapon. Depending on what class you play and depending on your playstyle, the Rivalate weapon might actually be better for you versus the cross weapon. However, at the end of the day, it's really about picking a weapon that fits your playstyle. So who should be using a Rivalate weapon? People who want to deal damage, a lot of damage, will pick the Rivalate weapon. It's a no-brainer. Just pick the Rivalate weapon if all you care about is dealing tons of damage, seeing huge numbers. Maybe you need more critical rate. Boom, its potential gives you that. You want more damage, the potential gives you that. You want less PP consumption, the potential also gives you that. And the stats are really, really good. And if you put on some augments on it and spend a little bit of resources tweaking your S abilities as well as your augments, you will have a very, very strong weapon. However, as I said earlier, you are giving up some quality of life stuff. So a good example would be maybe you're not very experienced in playing melee classes and you make a Rivalate Katana for your Braver or your Katana Phantom, and you go in, you hit the boss like, 3-4 times, you deal tons of damage, but the boss one-shots you. Then you're dead and you're not dealing damage. And even though you have a super duper powerful weapon, you won't be dealing any damage because you're dead. And so depends on your playstyle. Obviously, if you're super good at the game, you can dodge everything, you can counter everything, then by all means, Rivalate weapon is the way to go. Alright? So in conclusion, all 3 weapons are very good. Just really depends on where you are in the game. If you're just starting out, pure beginner, then maybe stick with the Atlas EX weapon because it's the training wheels. Then when you get better at the game, when you learn all the mechanics, when you know the boss fights, then you can start moving up. That way you save up a little bit of meseta, a little bit of materials so that you can make your next weapon. Maybe move up to the Trailblazer so you have your Atlas EX and your Trailblazer. Or you can just skip the Trailblazer and just go up to the Rivalate so you deal big PP damage. And at the end of the day, it's all about having fun. Please do not stress out over what weapon to get. If you have the Atlas EX weapon from the free event or you made an Atlas EX weapon, just use it. It's perfectly fine. If you have a Trailblazer weapon, just use that. If you have a Rivalate weapon, just make that. Now, if the new weapons, the still weapons come out and you want to make that, then go ahead. It's not a big deal. It's more about molding your weapons as well as your units to fit your playstyle. Everyone plays differently, and thus certain S abilities or certain augments will have more value to you versus me. For example, I really love Unflagging Spirit as well as the Hunter's Iron Will because it gives me peace of mind. It allows me to go full monkey brain and say, I'm gonna go full glass cannon with 1 HP and 10 bazillion damage because I will never die, because if I do die, I have all these potentials and all these things that will help me cheat death and live at 1 HP. But obviously, I don't always play like that. Sometimes if I'm doing solo content, for example, I might play a little bit more defensively. I might use my Trailblazer weapon because I'm like, alright, I'm going to play very methodically, I'm going to play carefully, but when there's windows of opportunity, that is when I'm going to capitalize and burst as hard as I can, and I'm going to need a ton of PP in order to do that. And in other times, maybe you just want flat out damage across the board because if the enemy's dead, they can't hurt you. So, it really depends on you. I feel like I've said the same sentence like 50 times already. But yeah, pick whatever weapon sounds best to you that fits your playstyle, okay? Anyway, that's pretty much all I wanted to cover in today's video. Hopefully you guys found it helpful. If you did, I would appreciate a like and a subscribe, and I'll see you guys in tomorrow's video. Bye.
What can I say except you're welcome? For the heels, the boots. so red.